Hi, I'm Andy Schmuckler and want to tell you this live stream conversation will begin in 1 minute. Hi, I'm Andy Schmuckler, and want to welcome you to a special edition of this live stream, a special breakthrough edition in that this old dog has learned a new trick. And instead of just being a monologue, we're going to have a conversation. One of my good friends, one of my smart friends, is going to put me through my paces on my better human story. This is what my mission has been, is to convey an integrated understanding of what's happened to our species that I claim puts various fundamental things in an importantly different light, like how to understand our nature as creatures, how to understand what our history has been and why it has been the way it's been, and how to understand the challenges that we face. It's an integrated picture, and that means the pieces all fit together. And my good friend, Forrest Jones, has chosen one of those pieces to explore with me here today, unrehearsed. He's going to tell you about why he's here. I just want to express my gratitude to him for being here, to put me through my paces. I always enjoy being put through my paces. I think I'm a certain breed of horse that runs around the circus ring, if given half a chance. So I'd like to bring you in, Forrest, and have you introduce yourself in whatever way seems appropriate to you.
Hi, thank you, Andy. Yeah, I'm Forrest Jones. Andy and I met when he was running for Congress. I was living in Roanoke, Virginia, just south of where he was. I first noticed Andy when an op-ed appeared in the local paper, and I thought it was cleverly written. I thought it was very insightful and perfectly, on point for the message that actually President Obama was about to speak to in our town. And while I was also volunteering for the Obama-Biden campaign at the time. So Andy and I actually met at an organizing function for political activists, political action in the area. And I spoke to him, and anyway, he asked me if I would help out with his campaigning, and I did, and I made some calls. I did some other work for him, and he and I became friends, and it's been fantastic friendship, and I've been, enlightened and inspired by his work, and I've done various things over the years to kind of help him get it out. I've never done this before, so I apologize in advance if this feels inexperienced, but it is. But hey, let's get started and talk about Andy's work today. So
Okay, well, I just want to say that the title that we've agreed on for what we're about to explore is Understanding Good and Evil in an Evolutionary Perspective. And while it's not the foundation of my better human story, it fits into all the other important pieces. So we'll see where we go. Take it away.
well, I think first thing I'll hit you with is, there's a Bible verse that says the love of money is the root of all evil. But it does seem your work is trying to say that actually it's the requirement for power in, this anarchical, however you say anarchy,
Anarchic.
anarchic
That's
system that we've
how it's a South
created.
Pole. Yeah.
Yeah, and then yeah. So it's like, would you say that it's the root of all evil?
Well, one of the things that I think should be pointed out is when they say, I mean, I think it's easy enough to refute the idea that the love of money is the root of all evil. I mean, greed's important, and when you look at the psychology of why people do things that are destructive, but it's not the only impulse that people have. So, I mean, but what I want to point out is that Bible verse puts the focus on human psychology, whereas what I'm saying is it's not evil impacts people. It can create the greed. It can create the lust for power. It can create the traumas that might lead to cruelty and all the evils that we see that exist, that operate with a psychological dimension. But the cause does not lie in the individual psyche. It's not, and which is why one of my main themes is the ugliness we see in human history is not a clear, accurate picture of human nature. So it's a systemic issue.
And it's only systemic now, like after years of evolution, right? I mean, it's when you think about the hunter-gatherer tribes trying to figure out how to share and do more together, and then the parable of the tribes itself, when we think about the first civilizational roots, there was this need for the selection for the ways of power, that the tribe that mastered the ways of power moved its seed forward, and those that didn't lost out.
In terms of that evolutionary perspective in the title of this conversation, what I will point to is the crucial moment when humankind took an unprecedented step. Life had evolved for 3.5 billion years. So up until 10,000 or so years ago, humans were still living in the niche in which they evolved biologically. But at a certain point, we extricate ourselves from that niche. We take that unprecedented step. And in an evolutionary perspective, what we see if we focus on that is that we're leaving an order that's been created by natural selection that encompasses the whole living system. It doesn't control the sun. It doesn't control asteroids. It doesn't control continental drift, but within its domain of control, it creates an order. And we were the only creature, the first creature after 3.5 billion years to step out of that order. And what I point to is, in an evolutionary perspective, you can see you're stepping into disorder. There isn't any order to regulate how things are going to operate like there was in the natural order, where the predator and the prey achieve a kind of mutual symbiosis, or at least a way together of maintaining the viability of both. You go into a disorder, and by focusing on that, you can see that all of a sudden you've generated a new kind of system, and the new system has a new dynamic. And that dynamic is what I say is the source of the evil that we see in the world. Not just when you say now, I don't know whether you're thinking, I think you were thinking about the last 10,000 years, but in any event, that's what I mean.
Exactly. I love it. I love it. And I noticed, in my thinking that, I always thought of the hunter and gatherer, like the movement to civilization. I always thought of it in this more friendly way. It's like, well, people like figured out how to gather seeds, and then they all of a sudden had more to share. And then they figured out how to herd rabbits, or they raised rabbits, and they had more to share. And I always thought of it through that evolution as that sharing thing. But your work points out, no, wait, power distorts everything. Power is there from the very beginning, and it is just momentous, evolution, that it you have to figure out how to master power.
Well, it may well be that when people extricated themselves from stopped living like hunter-gatherers, who are basically living more or less like primate groups did. I mean, there's a lot of continuity there, even as they're developing more and more culture. But when they start inventing, planting the plants they used to gather and herding the animals, or some of the animals they used to hunt, that may well have been something that they freely chose, happily chose. There's a book called the Food Crisis in Prehistory, which suggests that people were compelled to by certain kind of shortages, that they needed to be able to make the same amount of territory, produce more food, or their kids are going to start dying at higher rates and stuff. So it's a choice, but it's made by necessity, according to that theory. I'm not sure how well that theory's held up I studied that stuff in the 70s, and but whatever it was, we had become a global species. We were everywhere in the world, even including Australia, even and the southern tip of South America, as hunter-gatherers. And then, in certain places, something new starts happening, and they're off. And whether or not they chose that freely, which I don't know I'm in a position really to have much of an opinion about, it inevitably unleashes that systemic force, which I say generates a new kind of evolutionary force, which is not as it's not under the control of anything that will make sure that the whole's going to be okay, like is the case in the relationship between lions and zebras and grass. That's going to be okay. As long as the planet's in basically the same shape, they're going to work together. They're going to create a perpetual motion machine. But civilizing societies are emerging with nothing to regulate them. And that generates a destructive force. And I don't know if we want to go there in terms of, understanding evil. But I can trace, first of all, let me also say that if we looked at the hunting-gathering world before any of this started, I don't know what we would see exactly in terms of, is there anything there we would want to call evil? Was there, like sharks are pretty, by nature, they do some pretty gross things. I mean, Steve Spielberg, certainly highlighted that. Maybe, we've got some problems that were already evident, but as soon as we took that step, whether we were good or not good, it was inevitable that, I say, the spirit of the gangster is going to have a disproportionate voice in shaping how the civilization develops. And the spirit of the gangster does register on the spectrum of good and evil.
Absolutely. When we think let's look at this phrase you've got. It's on the front of, the main page for Better Human Story, and it's central drama, but it's the inescapable, ongoing dilemma that's initiated and it perpetuates. So how does it perpetuate? Why haven't we, ever just stopped being, war, mongerers, as it were, or why does the warlord still always have, outsized influence on our choices and our cultures?
At this moment, we've got your prototypical fascistic aggressor changing the whole situation in Europe by his own single-handed decision. Well, I use the metaphor of people getting trampled. I really should research this because I've been bringing it up a couple times. This is third time, and I haven't looked it up. But my memory, I think, is trustworthy. That sometime, I think in the 1920s, in some big nightclub in New York, a fire broke out, and many, many, many people died in the fire, not by being burned to death so much as being trampled to death. And as I recall, the doors opened inward. So if you've got a press of people trying to get out, the doors are held shut by the pressure of the people in a panic mode. And I believe that led to a new legal structure that I think went nationwide. But I like to differentiate between what I know and what I think I remember. That from then on, all doors of exit, in certain kind of circumstances, I don't know how it was phrased, but they have to open out. So that could never happen again. But so you look at everybody, all the terrible things that are happening in that nightclub when people panicked, needing to get out or be burned to death. And you say, well, what was there something about those people that made them tramplers and made them? No, it was the situation that they were in, where there is no ability of the whole they didn't have time to have a meeting and say, how are we going to deal with this? If the place burns down, are we going to, let's fire. Oh, that's what we did in school when we were growing up. We would have fire drills because there would be a collective decision about, in this situation, the best way for people to conduct themselves is that everybody stands up, they file out row by row or whatever it was we did in our fire drills, and walk to the nearest exit, which we know where it is, and we walk outside to a certain distance, and we turn around and watch school burn down. But that is what humankind and any civilization creating species, I say, you inevitably emerge into that kind of trampling situation where there's no natural order to control how everything's going to interact. And there's no means of creating and enforcing, like the fire drill or the equivalent of the fire drill, which would, for example, mean that it couldn't happen that a Vladimir Putin could single-handedly decide to unleash this terrible ugliness on the world. You would have a structure, and whatever that might be, that would be the equivalent of a fire drill, which said that we will put order where there has been disorder. Civilization inevitably emerges into a disorder. Creating order, well, in our case, it's taken 10,000 years and we haven't gotten there yet. But it's inevitable that it would be very difficult. If you've got a bunch of societies competing, say, in the Nile Valley, my Parable of the Tribes, which is the title of that book, is about how power spreads like a contaminant because the body has the overarching system of human societies has no way of resisting the impact of a power maximizing society, because it can conquer and dominate and exterminate and colonize and enslave and drive out and then also cause societies to imitate them in order to get enough power to resist them. In all those ways, power spreads throughout the system, and that is just a function of what it means to be a civilization creating creature.
And the example of the fire drill is the good side of the creature that can say, wait a minute, that was terrible. Let's put the lessons learned in here, and then let's start developing structure around that so that we never have that happen again.
Point. Thank you for that. In terms of the breakthrough into disorder is the source ultimately of what I call a coherent force that consistently works to make the world worse, which is my definition of evil. And I claim I can show it in several different ways. But you've just alluded to the good, the fire drill coming from, well, where does the fire drill come from? The fire drill comes from the fact that we have evolved to have motivations that lead us to conduct ourselves in ways that make it more likely that it will get our DNA into the future. That's what evolution's about. It crafts creatures, creatures from, everything alive, so that they're able to get their DNA into the future, because those that don't get their DNA in the future aren't there. Time moves along, and so we get motivated as mammals. I think it applies certainly as cultural animals. We are born with certain motivational tendencies, preferences, desires, needs that get us to move. So if we, with our intelligence, perceive, well, look what happened in Manhattan that day. So we got to do something so that we and people we care about don't get burned or trampled to death in the future. So that's the motivation, and it comes from, if you look, all the way down, you can see that being motivated in that kind of way is something that was good for our ancestors, for getting their DNA into the future, solving problems and such.
Amen. And for most species that have not left their biological niche, they do have a cultural transmission around some practices. They teach their young to be scared of certain things, and they, you know, keep them safe. They build caves and I mean dens and all kinds of different structures to keep them safe when they don't have the capacity to run away. And so we can see, you know, as a evolving thing, humanity as an evolving creature had that from the get-go. You know, they had that working to get started. But then culture is our engine, like DNA, right, for how to get societies to normalize and how to get past this, you know, problem of the lack of order and the lack of, but it works in both sides, right? The culture can teach you. I mean, like we got to name the president now. We know that he aligned himself with a guy, you know, Roy Cohn, who was a complete mobster-like lawyer, and, you know, and admired him and learned that culture and learned to become that human being, and that was a cultural transmission of systemic, you know, forces that in, you know, New York City were alive and well and working and, you know, barbaric in some ways, but in the middle of the most civilized, you know, city in all of the human creation.
If I may go back to that, the idea of the culture which you applied to other creatures besides ourselves, um, there is a degree of culture in other species, but the difference in degree is, and the way I think one should think about other creatures is that they have an inborn nature, but especially the more sophisticated brains, those mammals are born into a situation which is pretty much, you can take for granted that the babies will be born into a situation where there's a mother and the mother will, but a lot of that is instinctual. It is. I don't believe. You know, if you have a cat with kittens, there are a lot of things that they learn um, by being kittens of a female cat that takes care of them, that licks them, and all that stuff, and they do learn. That's part of the finishing of a creature, but I don't think, for the most part, they're learning cultural techniques that vary from,
They're
you
not
know.
trying to create a society, and
Well,
they're
but
not
even
not
those that
trying to
do,
be intersocietal.
I talk about an experiment done in Wisconsin in about rhesus monkey babies, and the guy divided them, and one half of one half got its needs reasonably well met by an artificial mother. One side, the other group didn't get its needs reasonably met, and they were completely dysfunctional. They weren't able to form part of a rhesus monkey society. They weren't able to reproduce. But that's not rhesus monkey nature.
Right.
They were not born into the evolution created not just what they're born with, but the situation into which they reliably would be born. But we humans, we're born into a situation that has been crafted by a social evolutionary process. We didn't evolve to be meeting the demands of this life. We were like every other creature, that we were born with a set of motivational structures and behavioral tendencies which had been selected for because they helped our ancestors survive in the niche where we evolved. This ain't it. So we're living in societies that have been shaped by this systemic force, which is not a function of human nature and is not necessarily very friendly to human needs. And we are therefore born into a society that's going to make demands on us, just like, you know, rhesus monkeys societies probably, you know, teach them how to behave right. But our society wasn't the same one that we evolved to be part of. So that unlike every other species, we can't just, do what comes naturally and have that be a generally good strategy for survival. We are having to internalize demands that our society makes, and that society has been shaped by the fact that only certain of the cultural options that human beings, a wide variety of options, only certain ones that can prevail in this disordered situation, which equates to a war of all against all, which means that what can prevail in a war of all against all gets a disproportionate say. And that's the spirit of the gangster. And that's how evil and a struggle within the human creature to fit into society and also get its needs met, which I think underlies a lot of how our religions have looked at the problem of evil. That we sense that we are not what our society is telling us that we are supposed to be. And the society is powerful enough to teach us that means the problem is us.
And then
Original sin.
say that again.
Original sin. I
Oh,
mean,
okay.
that's the lesson, is that if we've got this struggle, St. Paul says, the good that I would do, I do not do. And the evil that I didn't want to do, that I do. He's identifying with what Freud called the superego, or the paternal introject, but identifying with that when part of what shaped the demands of society is actually hostile to what we are by nature, then we experience ourselves as evil to the extent to which we buy that the society is right about what's good.
Now you've got me wondering whether I really get, like I would tell you that I got from you, when we want to try to figure out why it's okay and good to use, evil, as something that must be met and must be, controlled, and must be, you must wage battle against, in order to preserve the good, because otherwise it can overwhelm. And I always say that again.
So did something I say introduce some uncertainty about that?
Yes, but
let's hear it.
But well, I mean, it's good that you just questioned it, so I wasn't uncertain. So that is the way that you want to have your work understood in the short, way. And you just were layering on other
What appeared to be
complexities
a
to that.
conflict? What did you see that seemed like it called any of that into question?
I don't know. I'm too old to be able to remember what happened 70 seconds ago.
Yeah, I guess between the two of us, we're about 150 years old. So,
we, but I did, I think that is the easiest way to branch. I don't know what the pathology is on not using the word evil. You have been writing about that since I met you, and you had been writing about it before I met you. I can't get people to understand how important it is to recognize that there's an evil arising, and it is spread wide, and it is coming like a train. And if we don't get it off the tracks, we've got just more problems coming. And you were writing about that in the early aughts.
I think that
and it's just like, so I've been, since I met you and you were trying to get me to understand, because of course, I would tell you, I believed in a benevolent universe. I mean, I believe that it's mostly all good. Like everything's good, and the stuff that's bad is just ignorance. It's not that it has energy behind it. It's just ignorance or immaturity. And I always looked at it through that lens. But you're trying to champion. No, it's got momentum. It's got eons of energy behind, eons of cultural evolution behind it. It could spring forth and take over and wipe out too much of the good if we don't watch out.
What I claim that I can show, and we can go there or not, is that that you can discern a coherent force that consistently works to make the human world worse. And I can show it in a few ways about there being an it. You don't have to call it a force of evil. I mean, that's a separate question, what you name it, as long as you can see it. And I claim that I can show it. And it emerges independently of what the nature of the civilization creating species is. But in terms of understanding evil, it is a systemic force, and people can be broken by this force of brokenness, and that's another thing you can call it, or a destructive force. But the thing is, I think I can show that it's there. And then when you see that it's there and it moves through the human world by everything that's broken is the product of other things that are broken. And it has the consequence of having effects of making the world broken. So if you look at, like what led to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, what led to this whole ugly situation in Gaza, what has led to American democracy being imperiled in these days, like it appears to be, you can see that there's a force. There's a force in the human world that sometimes manifests itself very clearly, but is always working as a coherent force that consistently has these, is where brokenness begets brokenness. And broken people is part of that. Broken societies is part of that. The broken nature of the intersocietal system that leads to a war of all against all was the origin of that.
Well, why do we want to look at it as a impartial force rather than cultural conditioning that, served a purpose at some point, but now has gone awry?
Well, because the culture embodies the effects of the fact that we, as a species, 10,000 years ago, between 10 and 5,000 years ago, the emergence, eventually you get to these empires and tyrannies and these slaves and all, and the chronic war. That happened at a, because of that we had unleashed this social evolutionary force. It wasn't automatic. That human beings would have to behave that way. It wasn't because we were incapable of making better choices. We didn't have any choice. Civilization has been only very partially under our control. It's been basically out of control, and we make efforts to rein that in. But if we don't recognize that there's this force, I think that one of the reasons why our democracy is so seriously endangered right now, I've been watching this danger rising for about 30 years, 32 years, I think would be a fair number to give it. And I spent a lot of time trying to call people's attention that something is emerging in the American body politic that's different from what we're used to, and we shouldn't think of it as being what we're used to. And liberal America took a very, very long time, and elected leaders who didn't perceive that there was a coherent force that was taking over a part of the American power system that was consistently working to make things worse. And if you don't conceive of that possibility, and that's why I think that the secular worldview needs to look through the evolutionary perspective more intensely. Because if you look through the evolutionary perspective, you see that, there really does arise with civilization something problematic. And we've been dealing with it since the beginnings of civilization. And it's quite obvious right now where we have so much force of brokenness that we might end our whole experiment with the human civilizational creating species with a nuclear holocaust, or bringing the whole biosphere down on our heads because we're so reckless in our interaction with the rest of the living system on the planet. So we really need to see if we're up against something like that. And that's the title of that book up there, What We're Up Against. So it is important to see that, whatever you want to call it. It could destroy us. It means that we got to figure out what the fire drill equivalent is
Right,
here.
right. There must be a recognition of the problem, a compilation of ideas that then control it and prepare for it. But yeah, you're right. We're hitting. I agree that we're hitting the. I think it is an emergency moment. I mean, I do. I guess the countdown clock was narrowed recently. The countdown to the end of
Trying
civilization.
to, yeah.
That thing. So many people agree wholeheartedly. So this is an interesting way to go at it. You seem to have a frustration that people aren't, combating this straight enough, and you hope that an embrace of the conversation of, this is just a force in human nature that's not in human nature. You don't call it human nature. In
No.
human society, intersocietal,
It's part of the price that any creature would pay that launches on that fateful step into civilization. Civilization turns out to be a very mixed blessing. It unleashes something that makes history really traumatic.
And then so the systems we've created to control evil, we've got we have our president in court, trying to figure out, did he do wrong or did he do right? By a jury of his peers, we've created something to try to control evil in our society. And I certainly uh, admire and trust most judges I've ever known or met, and I've only met a handful in my life, and so I trust this process, and I recognize why this process is all we could create right now, and what is better than in Xi's China or Xi's China or Putin's Russia, where it's like if he wants somebody out, he just says, fix that, and then they're dead, and mysteriously, they've gone out a window or what have you.
They depart from a high window.
That's right. So we have a system that we've created here that was allowed me to live my life feeling, like I said, oh, it's a benevolent universe, and all things are good, because a lot of good happened to me over my lifetime, and I had safety and things I could trust in my society because we had built a bunch of good, and in actuality, I still believe that America is in a really healthy and good place. It's just that the Republican right has realized they can raise money and gather voters by saying that isn't true, even though it's true, and that they are telling a bunch of lies and gathering votes on a bunch of lies.
I don't think we're basically in good shape. I think that because one side got infected with a force of brokenness that was harnessing all kinds of broken stuff in our society, from white racism to corporate greed to, one side. And then the other side didn't think in terms of seeing the big picture, didn't put the pieces together and say, okay, well, this was a normal party that often played a constructive role in American history in this way and that way and that way. Eisenhower's Republican Party, Reagan's Republic, the first Bush even, normal Republican Party. This is something which, if you look around, ask yourself, what are they doing or saying of all the things that they do and they say that's actually making things better in terms, and we haven't talked about it. We haven't talked at all about the reality of value. I mean, which is, see, I think that part of the problem with the secular worldview is that people think that value is just a matter of opinion. And so I've gone at that really hard, because if you can't establish a reality to the idea of value, which I claim I can do, then how can you talk about good and evil? Oh, that's just your opinion. What about the Nazis? They thought they were doing good in Auschwitz. Oh, so who's to determine whether you're right or they're right? It's all just subjective. That is a problem. So we haven't gone there. I don't know that we should. But you said you believe in a benevolent universe. I just started writing a piece about that. For me, the story that makes sense doesn't begin until life starts, self-replicating things start to happen on this planet, is all I know about. And then there's a process of natural selection, and it has all kinds of implications. It's really a wonderful theory. But up until that point, I got no clue why anything is the way it is from the Big Bang up until 3.5 billion years ago on this rocky planet. Some molecules come together and start replicating. What do you mean when you say you think the universe is benevolent? Are you saying?
I just mean my, limited perspective of life and how it's going, and is the society in America supporting me? Am I finding my way? And can I,
Cosmos over the billions of years?
Well, sure. And yet, a star gets formed out of, pressure in gravity, and a star explodes, and it gives you more minerals and atoms that you need to create a planet. And then eventually maybe a planet forms. So, I mean, that's like a birthing, loving process too, in one way, even though it's completely, nothing but explosions and crushing energies and like that,
I'd love to see lovingness in the process. I don't see that. I mean, all these black holes and billions of galaxies and planets getting blown up, and all this stuff. I mean, where did that come from? And why is it here at all? And why?
Well, we don't. I mean, that's getting. We're not trying to solve the ultimate question of
But
why
you were
is it
saying
here
that
at
life
all.
is.
I just saying that my perspective, I grew up missing the aspect of, no, wait, society is being bent by these forces that are, and I was just complimenting, wait a minute, this was helpful. This was groundbreaking. This is a great conversation about why is there evil? Why does God let it happen? I mean, because it's like, that's still on the mind of plenty of people I know. Why does God let these things happen to these babies? It's like, well, wait a minute, it's happening, and it's happening, and
There's
there's
a
a
rabbi.
cause.
There's a rabbi who wrote when bad things happen to good people. He had been through such an enormously painful experience of his son, just a boy going through great suffering and then dying at an early age. And so he was asking that question. And I want to believe in what a lot of people believe in terms of when they ask, why is God letting this happen? There's so many assumptions, like there is a God, they're assuming.
Right. Number one.
And that this God is good, and he's powerful enough so that if it happens, it means he's let it happen. This rabbi, I think his name is Kushner or something like that. It's a really fine book, real
Good
struggle
explanation.
of the soul.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he comes to valid conclusions, which is either God is not good. If there is a God, given the realities of what we see, either he's not so good or he's not so powerful. If it's people in the religious traditions have wrestled with this question, why has God let it happen, for centuries, and it's even got its own name as a theological field. It's called theodicy, not by Homer, not like the Iliad, but theodicy, Theodicy. And it's trying to answer the question, why is there evil? And there is no solution within their system that makes sense. But they came up with a solution that either they believed made sense, though it doesn't, and I claim I can prove that it doesn't, or they pretended it made sense because they they were so determined to
They ran out of
maintain
gas.
maintain the idea. I would love to there to be a God that would make sure, that would be all good and all powerful and all wise and omniscient and all that. I'd love to be on that team. Sometimes I actually feel pain for the lack of that. But if you look at the evidence, well, what the theologians have done in the Western tradition is they've said, well, God endowed us with free will. It doesn't work.
No,
And
I love your argument. I think it's exactly the right argument. It's like, well, it's sort of free, except for, you
I,
can't choose peace,
I
you know?
believe I believe that we make choices. I don't think that it's
Yeah.
like something is forced on us or anything like that. Like in Lawrence of Arabia, there's a determinism that's got nothing to do with causality, but it was written. I don't believe that, but I do believe that we are in a world where there are causes and effects. And if you look at how this free will is supposed to operate in a world that's ruled by causes and effects, you just can't get there. The Roman philosopher Lucretius tried to get to free will by saying there are random swervings of these billiard balls of atoms running around, and that randomness gives us free will. Well, even if there were that randomness, and there's a book recently called Swerve, even if there were that randomness, how you get from billiard balls randomly swerving to us making decisions that are not the product of the causal network in the world, how you get to blame Adam and Eve for being disobedient. Well, why, if he's omniscient, why didn't he create Ralph, who would have been, who wouldn't have eaten of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? You just can't. It's just all blame the victim that our theologies have been on. Things have unfolded according to causes and effects. We are very intelligent and creative creatures, unprecedented at an unprecedented level, allowed us to take the experiment of life on Earth to a whole new place that turned out to be dangerous. Evil is not supernatural. It's a destructive force that emerges because there's disorder, and you need order to maintain good order.
Yeah. Ecological balance and the life-giving forces that keep us healthy, right? Keep us moving forward.
Peace on earth and goodwill toward men.
Right. Which, yeah. I mean, how many people, that I talk to, I don't want to say this. I mean, I don't want to be insulting, but they only come back to, what's so funny about peace, love, and understanding. They just come back. Why can't they just choose it? Why can't they see this? Why can't they choose that? Why can't they?
Who's the they?
Well, anything that isn't working out the way they assumed or up to an ideal they hold, right?
Yeah, okay. That question, I suggest, be taken to that level of cause and effect. In other words, you see people behaving in a way that you say, well, that's not good. Yeah, that makes the world worse. Then you ask yourself, I mean, this is what I propose. This is one of the ways that I think that if you do this studiously enough, you see the coherent force. You ask yourself, well, how did it come to be that this person at this point was somebody who would do those things that, and so you ask, well, how did that come to be? How did Hitler come to be what he was? How did the people who responded to Hitler with that kind of fervor and willingness to inflict a nightmare on the world, how did they get to that place? Not everybody goes to those places, but in the world of causes and effects, in child rearing, like there was a World War I that had a lot of impact on a lot of people, not real beneficial effects on, certainly not on Hitler. So if you ask, how did they get that way? Then you begin to see, well, if you see the brokenness, say, of World War I, or the brokenness of German militarism that has been there for a long time in Prussia, for example, and the brokenness of the spiritual, intellectual, moral disease of anti-Semitism that was also in the German culture, that was working and influenced people, had impacts in that. You get to people who are going to behave the way they did behave. And so if you ask yourselves, why aren't they doing the right thing? Why are they doing this wrong thing? Why are they lining up these people at the ditch at Baba Yar and machine gunning men, women, and children into the ditch? Why is this happening? If you look, you see that there are certain kinds of answers. They almost always show that brokenness begets brokenness, and something's moving through the human world. And you can see that something the way you can see the wind when the trees sway and the clothes flap on the line. That's one of the ways of seeing this destructive force that operates much the way religions used to say the force of evil operates. Am I not giving you enough room in this?
That's fine. No, I was pondering different directions to go. I mean, it's always, what do we want to say? I mean, Hitler is, of course, everybody's go-to, because everybody in Western culture, and even the Germans themselves today, recognize we didn't want to do that. We wish we had never done that. That was the wrong way to go.
People
Now,
who feel
you have
like Hitler,
neighbors that you talk about from time to time who live in the valley there, and in your congressional district, who can't be persuaded not to support the GOP. They will rationalize their way into their vote for something that is not in their favor, no matter how ugly it keeps getting. And I think, the last fellow who ran, got the exact same percentage that you got. Every Democrat that's run gets about the exact same percentage. Nothing is changing. It's not like it's improving. It's not like,
3% either way. Yeah.
I mean, it's just, up or down by 3%. It's just stunning that, and this is, and when I generally don't have a lot of friends that talk politics, but, those that will, they won't, entertain anything that other than, well, I know they're good people. I don't know why they do it. And I don't know how they can believe that. And they're really good people. And I know I could be neighbors with them all. And this is this dilemma. So what do we think are the causes for those souls? Because, we know they're a lot, they're voting against their own interest, or we believe that. And of course, we can now I say that with authority, even though, everything must be subjective, blah, 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 if I'm a liberal. But I believe absolutely that they're voting against their interest, and have since, everybody decided they would reelect George W., after he'd gotten us into such a mess.
They're also voting against the values. As you know, I did talk radio with these people, and felt a whole lot of respect and appreciation for a lot of the conservative culture and the values that they expressed and lived by. So, I do make claims that I've understood some fundamental things, in this better human story, in this battle between good and evil at the center of human drama. But I do not claim that I'm not satisfied with my understanding of, because I got a ringside seat to watch a transformation to occur.
Yeah.
I talked with people who had good Christian values, who revered the Constitution, who believed in the importance of good character. And I think they were quite sincere and quite beautiful in how they expressed it. And let me also say that outside the political realm, I think I have can say with some confidence, outside the political realm, these people who showed their goodness in my hundreds and hundreds of hours of talk radio conversations about questions of meaning, they still show that kind of goodness when you watch their conduct as neighbors, as people in business, as members of their churches and community. But when you get into the political realm, it's as if a switch gets switched. They have been led into a state which I don't understand, but all my attempts to understand it have to do with the conservative culture always had, in addition to its wonderfulness, its defects, its brokenness, the things that were not integrated, and those have been exploited. And I went into radio because I heard what Rush Limbaugh was doing to people's minds. It was poisoning, and it was exploiting the least good aspects of the people that I was loving while I was talking to them about their beautiful values. And somehow there is a process by which really capable propagandists were able to move them into a frame of mind where intelligent people, and if it were just it's all stupidity, no, there's intelligence there. You can see it in a whole variety of ways. A workman who has a problem to solve that who figures out something I couldn't have figured out. There's intelligence there, yet they believe things that are manifestly false.
Right. I've always put that away in my brain, like it's like category of body of knowledge. Like I, grew up in technology, and so I would know the technology that I knew. But here's a new emergent technology, and I've got to transition and learn that next, and get my body of knowledge deeper. I got to figure out what matches, what doesn't match. I've got to go over there and learn a bunch of new concepts, and I've got to figure out why they solve the problem differently. And again and again and again in technology, you have to keep mastering new bodies of knowledge. Well, politics is like a body of knowledge that none of them ever had to master. And then Rush and Fox said, hey, here's how to master politics. You think of it this way. Well, that's my theory on it. And then why is propaganda something that emerged as useful, but it would emerge post, well, I don't know. I guess the Greeks and Romans wrote about propaganda, right? And using impassioned speeches of bullshit to get themselves into power. So it's still just a power move, right?
Well, let me say something about that intelligence thing. I think I can. If you got a bunch of people who are inside this political alignment that's become worrisome in America, good people, you love to do business with and stuff, but they're aligned with this thing that's behaving in such destructive ways. And I've said, well, what is it that happens to a person's consciousness when their intelligence gets, I say, turned off? You're just saying, well, they're in a realm that they're, if you got, let's say, 10 of those people and 10 people from that are matched for intelligence, say, who are on not in that political force, either are on the other side or are independent of either side. And you ask them a question like, was the 2020 election stolen from Donald Trump? My guess is that most of the 10 people who are not in that bubble, even though politics isn't their forte necessarily, even though they haven't been trained in statistics, but if just paying a little bit of attention and they find out that 60 out of 60 cases that were brought said there's no evidence here, and there's just such mountains of evidence that anybody paying a little bit of attention on that side that's not part of this, they will say, "Oh no, in fact, maybe I heard that Trump's own cybersecurity, election security guy said this was the safest, most secure." I mean, the evidence is just overwhelming. All the recounts, and it's just a completely untenable position, and it's not because these other 10 that do believe. Well, actually, I think the 7.5% out of the 10, well, one half person, I don't know if it'd be the right half or the left half, would believe that the election was stolen, in spite of their being just as intelligent. So something, and none of them needing to have training in politics to know. And then also, what about the idea about whether we should deal with a pandemic in the way that civilized societies have been dealing with pandemics ever since the germ theory got established. You got to do certain things. And if you got a vaccine, everybody's got to get it because it's part of our obligation, quarantine, et cetera. That's what we all do. But, that 10 people are going to believe that that there's something pernicious about Fauci. And what about climate change, where you have a whole field of scientists shouting at the top of their lungs for 30 some years since the Rio conference, we got a real problem, we got to respond, this is really going to be a big thing, biggest crisis ever face our species. And I don't know what percentage of those 10, but a lot of them would be believing what they're told, that's patently in the interest of the fossil fuel industry for them to believe, and contrary to what the whole field of climate scientists is trying to tell them. So something happens to people's minds that turns off the intelligence. And I think it's got something to do like a trance state. It's got something to do with a transference of the us to sort of sacrificing one's intellectual autonomy to an authority. It's been studied in the Nazi era, and I've read those studies, but I still don't really get it. I've seen it happen here, but I still don't really.
Yeah. Well, somehow the drumbeat of the repetitive lie allows it to, persist. Like you say, it's a lie that the 2020 election was stolen, and yet you can still find this huge percentage of folk that are willing to say that. You got political, people in high office willing to say that it, if they don't say it was outright stolen, they say, well, there were still a lot of questions about that election that haven't been resolved. It's like, and that's the only way that they can say, I need to align with this, gentleman. That's his line. I've got to find my way to, not get out of graces with this asshole. And then, they just succumb. So is it, yeah, I mean, I agree wholeheartedly that it's some sort of turning off, dimming of the capacity for rational, but it's also just, I don't know. And people keep telling me this, right? It is sort of like, I keep hearing this same thing. So there must be some energy there. I mean, I don't think you could get, I mean, if you had, I mean, we do even have some like, I don't want to, anyway, because Donald Trump was already a established cultural figure, was already a celebrity, he has been able to command, more propaganda deeper into society than I think anyone else could have done. I don't think Mitt Romney, even if he'd wanted to employ this strategy, could ever have gotten as far, because the Donald was already a creature that was well known and was very influential and respected.
For sure, something
But I guess the question was more about how this drumbeat of propaganda is somehow influential in society in a way that must be evolutionarily traced back to, some aspect of how how power wielding is done, and why it's still comes back to the problem of the outsized influence of this quest for power in all of the organizing of society.
Well, I don't know when you said evolutionary, if you're talking about like a biological evolution, but
No. So, cultural evolutionary, a cultural thing that was, embraced and kept, right?
I think that
Transmitted by,
the vulnerability of the conservative side of the dichotomy, and I'm not just talking about the American thing, the vulnerability wherever you look in, whether it's Iran or Russia or the United States or Germany, the vulnerability on the right has got something to do with forming a solidarity behind a leader. The
the
I
king,
think
the strong man. Yeah.
I mean, the
So
liberal.
it's more a traditional, you know, norm because it was probably 10,000 years of kings or, some sort of other strong guy at the top.
The right wing gets broken, it becomes manifest as a fist. It's all these people form a kind of fist behind a force. When the liberal side becomes broken, it creates other kinds of more scattered disorders, like a high proportion of babies being born outside of the kind of family structure that is most conducive to children growing up with their various needs met to become whole in their lives and whole in society. And I'm not saying it's got to be one thing or another, but chaos in reproduction is not the recipe for the good, whatever form that takes. And excessive permissiveness, excessive hesitance to make any kind of moral judgment opens the gate for certain kinds of brokenness to become to lead to a different kind of chaotic society. Whereas on the right, they're unified behind often a leader or a regime or an ideology. In the case, this problem is much precedes Donald Trump. You can see the precursors of all these problems also in the W presidency. He was not the same. He was not as attached to the basic American values of how you deal with power as his father had been. I mean, there were some issues with the first Bush too, pardoning people, and maybe there was something not quite kosher about the Panama invasion. But basically, he was a very decent guy, a normal American politician running a normal American presidency. But by the time we get to W, there's already the structures that had been created to sort of domesticate power in our national scene were being partially dismantled and set the stage for worse to come, because liberalism was unprepared to deal with what was emerging at that point. I mean, we got something like what the United States did officially with respect to torture was not something we'd ever done before. And then something like the torture memo, which was basically a set of arguments that basically said that it was presidential immunity in a pseudo-legal form. And there are other
for
things.
all the people who had to carry it out too. It's immunity.
Yeah, everybody is immune. You can't prosecute him. He was just expressed an opinion. You can't prosecute the president. He was just following the opinion. You can't prosecute the people who followed the orders the president gave them, all violating the law. He were just following orders. Everybody's immune, and it wouldn't just have to be torture by John Hughes' torture memo's logic. So anyway, it began before that. And liberal America was not focused on something is emerging here, which is not something we've seen before. Or if we saw it before, it was sort of like the power that was rising in the 1850s that gave us the Civil War. So the thing to look at is, how does this happen? And we were talking about, well, how do you get intelligent people to act stupid about what they believe? And how do you get good people to embrace things that are doing destructive things that you know, look like a force of evil? That's what I've wrestled with for years. But whatever the thing, when you do see that all of these things are aligned behind a force that's a coherent force that's consistently, not a mixture like Eisenhower's Republican Party or Reagan's Republican Party, but not a mixture, but pretty much of a pure case. You got to ask yourself, well, if every time they act, they're making things worse, if every time they speak, they're making things worse, what can we infer about the reality of there being a coherent force that is determining all that? And we can look at, well, how do the people get broken? How did they get led into this broken place? How is it that the conservatives, the kind of people who deliver eloquent statements about on the 4th of July in the park, about what a wonderful gift our founders gave us, you know, the land of the free and home of the brave, and the Constitution and the rule of law, and, you know, a government of the people, for the people, and by the people, you know, all that stuff that we'd hear from them or their parents or their grandparents on the 4th of July in the town square. How can they be embracing at this point something which has got a lot of people worried right now that all of that might get swept away in the coming election with their help?
With
the help of the people.
With help of these people who would have otherwise,
I mean,
just stood in line, waved, saluted the flag.
And you mentioned before the members of the party who are in Congress, and in the same breath as the base. I think that there's a bit of a dichotomy there, though there are probably both kinds of people in both the base and the. I think that an important thing is we hear from all kinds of reports that the Republicans in Congress know precisely what's what, or at least most of them do, because they say so privately. They realize the threat. Bill Barr realizes the threat. He's told us. McConnell recognizes the threat. Nikki Haley recognizes the threat. And all of them are now supporting what they have told us is a threat to the American democratic experiment. So we've got the deceivers in positions of power, and some of them may actually be true believers, but I think that most of the base actually does believe in
the deception. They swallowed the deception whole.
Yeah, the liars and the lied to. The people who are willingly aligning themselves with what they know is somehow destructive. And then the people who believe that they're on God's side and that they're supporting the guy who's made sure that those baby killers don't get to keep doing what they were doing.
Yeah, there are simple, passionate arguments made that align, a ton of them. And then there's just the, I don't know how to, or there's the bubble that they're in that keeps them believing the lie and keeps reinforcing how the lies are their healthy story. And they're oblivious to the fact that they're the destructive force. They are swearing that the destructive forces coming at them from the border, from the liberal, elite, from the swamp in Washington.
Most of it's based on falsehoods.
Right, right. I mean, I did live in Washington for a while. I knew plenty of people who worked for the government. They were all just hardworking schmucks who did the best they could. I got a son-in-law right now who still works for the government, and he's just a hardworking schmuck who does the best he can. And the government does a lot of great things. And but you couldn't tell a Republican that. They're ready to burn the house down right now.
Ability to get people to believe things that aren't true is part of the heart of fascism wherever I've studied it. Putin's people, on the whole, believe some ridiculous things. Hitler's people, on the whole, believed some ridiculous things. And the people right now who are believing they're doing God's work when they're planning to vote for something that might sweep American democracy aside and give us a fascistic regime instead, they think they're doing, I think most of those people think that they believe all kinds of things about what's gone wrong that they've been told by a force that's been willing in sociopathic ways to deceive and manipulate and exploit people to gain power. And how to bring the intelligent and good people back to seeing what intelligence reveals to be true and acting on behalf of the values that they say they hold sacred. That is a major task that America now faces.
Do you think that the stories of Japan and Germany and Italy, from their World War II experience, suggest that fascism ends up burning itself out or running itself off a cliff? I mean,
well,
because like you say, you're saying that its motivation is just tearing down what's good for the human. And it just keeps finding what's the next thing I can do that will tear down the good for the human.
Motivation is a quest for power. The force at the top is all about power. That's what fascism is. That's why Hitler invades Poland in 1939. Putin invades Ukraine in 2022. And Iran is for becoming, dominating that whole region and has done a pretty good job of building an extensive network. That's what they're about. And they're willing to do whatever they have to do to the people to get that. But the problem is that, or one of the problems is, it all rests on falsehood. It rests on a degree of human brokenness that goes with that lust for power. There's falsehood in a sense at the beginning of it. I just published a piece on Daily Kos that kind of took off on fascism and the lie, and I talked about how Karl Rove was famous at a particular moment when he basically spoke contemptually of the reality-based community. There was a kind of contempt for reality. We're an empire now. We're creating our own reality. And when they left office in 2009, the world was in shambles. The Iraq war, the financial breakdown, and the state of the American body politic, it was all seriously damaged. So I think that you say, does fascism somehow destroy itself? And I think about a lot of those old horror movies where evil does end up with, like Rebecca's house burning down on the hill in Cornwall over the sea. It's burning down because evil destroys itself. Well, in his evil, Vladimir Putin has inflicted huge damage on Russia. His brokenness led to believing all kinds of things that turned out not to be true. he disastrously misjudged everything, and he's destroyed his country's recognition. He's an indicted war criminal. He's sacrificed hundreds of thousands of young Russian lives. You know,
Right. And that's hundreds of thousands of, Russian mothers who are, wailing and gnashing their teeth.
I actually thought it was going to bring him down. But I tend a little bit toward wishful thinking when I look into the future. Oh, if only, but it still might happen. I mean, there's a history that when Russian leaders lose, they're soon gone. And it goes back to the age of the czars. It wasn't okay for a Russian leader to lose. Afghanistan in 1987 or something like that. The Soviet army had to withdraw, and soon the end of the Soviet Union. So, but the pro-Putin wing of the Republican Party, which is mapping a lot of ways with the kind of spirit of fascism, came to Putin's rescue by delaying our giving aid to Ukraine for a crucial half year. I mean, how many Ukrainian lives were sacrificed? How much territory did they have to relinquish that had been so hard won? But our crisis is part of a larger picture in the globe of democracy versus fascism. It took me a long time to recognize that the American problem wasn't isolated. But now I see it is, but I don't understand why has it been the last 20 years democracy has lost ground so many places to a rising force of fascism. I mean, I'm not the one that says that. Freedom House or something does a regular study, and I think since 2006 they've been mapping the retreat of democracy in Turkey and India and Brazil, and so something's going on globally, and I think that the battle between democracy and fascism really maps well about good and evil, if that's what we're still talking about. I hope we're satisfying your curiosity about this issue. But I think if you take democracy and you look at how is it different from fascism, and you say that good is human lives and other lives thriving and experiencing fulfillment and all that stuff. If that's the good, you can easily show that fascism has qualities that are destructive of the good, and democracy is one of our great inventions for trying to realize more good in this troubled civilization that we have. So we've got that battle going on a global level, with fascism gaining ground. And then the question is, what's happening? There's something non-random going on. How is Turkey connected with India or Israel and Brazil?
Well, I'm influenced by, the analysis that, Turkey and India are both doing a, retreat into more traditional,
Hindu nationalism.
nationalism and ethnocentric thinking. So they've just, they've retreated in, instead of being multicultural and welcoming and, how we're international players, they are retreating back into, well, we've got to find the core of our nationalists and get them happy and healthy, and then we can maybe rejoin.
Just raises the question in a new form. So if you've got Turkey going toward Islamicism at the same time as, and basically somewhat dismantling Ataturk's democracy, pluralistic democracy that he created. And if you've got Modi's Hindu nationalism, sort of undoing what Gandhi and Nehru tried to create in this Indian democracy, and they're both happening at the same time and moving in the same general direction. And they're not the only countries. You got Jewish nationalism in rising in power in Israel. So why are those things happening at the same time is the question that I'm saying intrigues me that I don't.
Well, part of what you were answering earlier, helps, provide a context for me. And that's that the broken part of liberalism, of multicultural democracy, is all these, breakdowns in family structure, breakdowns uh, in disciplines that help create more order, right? So it's like when 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 yeah, if all you really need to do is, learn how to dance well and make rap songs, to make it in America, uh, what, and let me just say, I'm very, I don't appreciate rap music at all. I don't find it, complicated or very artistic. But I know fellows that do. I listen to Ari Melber all the time, and he's always going on about it. But the point being that inside the container made by the good of democracy, you have these pathologies that are arising that the right and the conservatives, so modernity has given us all these blessings, and it's just not, we're not being blessed by it. And so I think that's the retrenchment into a conservative state is, wait a minute, when we followed our religious norms, we were healthier. We didn't have these weird pathologies. I think maybe something like that is what I would explain it. And it fits in, what your, theory works.
You know, I would be interested to know what we would find if we tested what you just said, not just looking at the United States, where um, there has been a lot of liberalization at the cultural level. Um, I mean, are we talking about like gay marriage is not for?
How does gay marriage help humanity move forward, right? I mean, there's,
Well, I could make a case for
people of traditional mindset would ask that question and would not find a good answer, right?
it. So I understand in America, I mean, I was a member of the counterculture and I wanted to think a lot of things to get liberalized. And for the most part, um, I see uh, the liberalization as being um, arguably making the society more whole. I think that the persecution of minorities by majorities, be racial minorities or sexual minorities, is destructive. That allowing people to be treated according to goodwill toward men, free to be you and me, as much as possible. But so that's America. But what you're suggesting, and this is what I don't know is true, if we went back to where it is that Erdogan started to effect his Islamicist takeover of Turkey, which eventually led to an attempted coup, which gave him an excuse to destroy a lot of democratic institutions and maybe even jail a whole lot of people and eliminate free journalism to a certain degree and bring universe. I don't know what all he did, but I read about it at the time. So if we go back to the beginning there in Turkey, would we find that there was some kind of cultural chaos? I wasn't aware of it, but then, my awareness of what's going on the ground in Ankara and Istanbul and the countryside is super limited. So, but I wasn't aware that they were having uh, cultural anarchy. And if we go to India before Modi rises to power with his Hindu nationalist party, would we find that India was suffering from some kind of moral chaos that was new because of the secular democratic structure? I mean, it's a country with hundreds of languages and ethnic groups. I mean, it was never super well ordered, but was there some kind of cultural disorder that Modi that caused people stress that they answered by voting for the likes of Modi to impose an orthodoxy on the country? I don't know. Do you?
I don't know. I was just trying to make sense of it through the lens of what you had said earlier about the pathologies that arise that are the brokenness in the liberal side of societal thinking.
Well, let me float one little hypothesis of mine. I don't know how worthy it is of attention. I think that the modern societies, the democratic world, on the whole, was working very well by the standards of human history. I think that people in the United States and probably elsewhere were more materially well off. They were less oppressed by the governing structures, more free to live lives according to their own sense of where they wanted to go with them. If you compared it with like 200 years ago or something like that, I bet they had people in general have had it pretty good. I don't know that's true, but that's my impression. And what I think might be the case is is this all there is? Kind of emptiness for a variety of reasons that we could also go into or not go into speculating about. I think that people have a need for meaningfulness that religions have generally been the means of satisfying, and that a culture of individualism and consumerism, other isms we might conjure up, that people are getting a lot of freedom and they're getting their material needs met, and they're not being oppressed, but maybe there's some spiritual need that's not getting met by the kind of life that emerges in such of a society. Maybe a lot of people aren't finding themselves capable of filling that need using their own resources to do it. I feel like
I think so. I think we to that end, it's all the technological transformations that have just been so rapid and so unrelenting, disorienting and unrelenting, that as a father, I wasn't positive how to guide my kids into the new world that I done a pretty good job of integrating well with, because technology was moving, and I had no idea what they could find their way in and create livelihood, because there were so many changes and what industry was going to get disrupted next and whatever. They all turned out great, but I couldn't feel like I knew how to guide in that mess, because it was all just I was in technology and it was still overwhelming me. So yeah.
I wanted to touch another piece of the picture that we got to a little bit about the good. I just talked about our motivational structures, if I recall what I did at that point in the conversation. But another thing that I talk about, first of all, I say we have an evaluative experiential tendency. There are things that humans are built to experience as better or worse, and that forms the foundation for talking about the good being real. But the other thing that I talk about in terms of the evolutionary perspective directing our attention to the reality of the good and of our having access to a force for the good, is that part of what evolution has put into us, and I think can be demonstrated empirically, is a capacity for spiritually transformative experience. That people across the world through history, a fairly high proportion, and maybe everybody has that capacity, but at least I'd say a third of people from what I've read actually have experiences that have a special quality, which has to do with, seeing some spiritual truth or having some spiritually transformative experience that has an impact on your life, or having a level of experience that says, makes you feel like you're in contact with a dimension of things that's sacred. These are things that I say, whatever you want to think about, objective reality. Part of objective reality is that seems to be the capacity to have that special kind of experience is built into us by evolution. And I don't know what other species, other species have the better and worse thing. Maybe elephants, I don't know if anybody else has got this capacity, but humans do. And so I think a lot of the secular worldview gives short shrift to the spiritual, and giving something that's demonstrably life-serving, otherwise it wouldn't have been selected for and be part of our nature. We should not ignore or treat as some second class, not really real, as just subjective, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the challenges that we may face if we want to make
let me just back up and say, that also may be, Erdogan and Modi's, motivational too. Like, I know that this is so, I know that, the roots of it were alive for me most when, I was most involved in my, culture, either Islamic or Hindu, and so they're trying to refasten, the human spirit to that full spirit, connection.
Modi and Erdogan and the like may have a spiritually meaningful mission that they hit upon in their partly broken ways,
Well,
I would say.
Any
But
society trying to revert back to more traditional ways, then let me just
but
broaden it.
or alternatively, they may have just seized the opportunity to say to the people, I can provide you with a path through which you can find a spiritually meaningful connection with your country.
Right.
It would be nice if they could find that in a way that didn't trample on the rights of other people to, like the Muslims are not being well treated in
Do it
India.
without an us and them, right? Do it
Exactly.
with just us and not an us and then them.
And that's how the spiritual path can be essentially employed or exploited by a force of brokenness. Because from the us versus them aspect, that's come from a force of brokenness. So when Hitler is talking in that beautiful Nazi film, The Triumph of the Will, showing Hitler speaking to this throng at the Nuremberg Square, and they're in this spiritually ecstatic situation. But we know that he's tapping into that in the name of brokenness, not in the name of
Right.
love thy neighbor as thyself.
Retaliation and redemption, and I'm your
Retaliation.
Retribution. He was their retribution and their
Yeah. Peace on earth, goodwill toward men, and then you vote for the guy who says, I am your retribution. Turn the other cheek, he said, Retribution is not on the menu that you were provided by your religious tradition.
Now
Well, that's another sign of the brokenness, that what we've got here is a failure to integrate. We've got good people supporting evil because the broken part of them got grabbed and exploited by a force of brokenness.
Right.
how to bring good people
Shall,
back to the side of goodness is.
well, I still want to believe that it's a good, inspiring leader with a good, inspiring set of, talks.
Oh,
I mean, I was a part of the Sanders, campaign in 2016, and not everybody, I mean, if you didn't watch what Bernie did and you were only told what Bernie did, you don't know anything about what happened. If you didn't watch what was happening at rallies, if you didn't listen to the way he commanded the speech, if you didn't watch the way the crowds were dancing and playing and having a wonderful time while he was telling them the billionaires were taking, all their rights. I mean, if you didn't see the joy that was in it by being close to it, and you were just told, yeah, Bernie's ranting about billionaires again. He's done it since he was 14 and he's going to do it till he's 50,000 years old. But, whatever, and I remember, trying to advocate for him and having so many people, well, I can't vote for a socialist, and he says he's a socialist. So, I mean, that was it. That's as far as anybody wanted to go. So anyway, moving right along, I just know that a good, inspiring speech, a good, inspiring leader does bring out a lot of folk. And he got 43% of the delegates that year in that convention. And that was a hard race against, a lot of people who had wished Obama hadn't taken Hillary's slot in 2008, So there was a large body of money against him, and there was a large body of people who were looking for the first woman president. So, but I didn't find Hillary inspiring at all. And I really wanted Hillary in 2008, and I would have worked on her campaign until I heard Barack Obama speak, and I was like, that guy's going to be the guy.
Well, I agree with you. I'm going to leave the Bernie issue aside, but I recognize the truth.
But the passionate,
the
passionate vision, repeating the same. I mean, if you took 17 copies of his speeches, you could find the same 5, 6, 7 points just burned in over and over and over and over again.
I
just
agree
changing
with you
3 or 4 words.
That the right kind of leadership could grab a lot of the American body politic and mobilize it for the good. The problem with liberal America, in terms of a failure to provide that, I would go to Obama, who had the capacity to do that. Mentioned various times that if he had played his role, starting the day after inauguration differently, that could have been the end of the rising fascistic force. I don't want to go into detail, but I had an open letter to Obama, still in his first year in office, an open letter saying, you were elected to fight the fight, don't forfeit that fight. And he did forfeit it because he had capacities, but he didn't have he didn't have the direction and the kinds of passion behind that direction to deal with what he was up against. And
he did not see it. I agree with you wholeheartedly. He was the none so blind who could not see. He could not see what he was up against.
And I observed after Obama left. And by the way, I love Obama.
And he still doesn't talk like that. I mean, at least Joe has started talking about, well, I can't cooperate with them anymore. My God, we've got to defeat them. And Joe, problem with him is he simply doesn't have the capacity to inspire. He's not an orator. He does hire good speechwriters. If you just read his speeches and you didn't have to watch him deliver them, he hires good people.
If you just read them, but if him reading them, his abilities as a communicator are just not there. I mean, and also let me say that I did not support Biden until it was clear that he was the one that we had to have, and I was all in for him then. But I didn't support him because I felt that what we need is a fighter I'm a big admirer of FDR. I mean, when I was running for Congress, I read practically a dozen biographies of FDR, and if he, or his contemporary equivalent were leading the charge, there you've got both the Obama's capacity to move people, and the other piece that's missing, not all that present even in Biden and even now, the capacity to say, bring it on. I'm going for you. He says in that FDR says, I welcome their hatred. These malefactors of great wealth. I mean, he was ready to go toe to toe when that's what defending what he was for required. And liberals have not fielded that kind of a person.
No, the zeal isn't there yet.
And I was a big fan of John Kerry too, just as a human being. I mean, he's a very decent guy. He can be proud of what he did around Vietnam, both his volunteering to go to Vietnam and his coming back and testifying. That was the big test of our generation, and he had both sides covered. He was a fine man, but he could be swift-boated because he was infected with something else in the liberal culture, which is a relationship with combat. I've wondered whether, I was a dove on Vietnam, but I'm a warrior too. And when I thought that in 68, when it became clear, we got no reason to be there because this is just going to be more and more costly. And at the end, we're not going to have anything to show for it. That's my way of being a dove. And also what we're doing doesn't really match our values all that well. But in any event, we're going to lose. I have a feeling that when the Democratic Party broke up over like the Scoop Jackson hawkish guys versus the George McGovern doves, that something took over the liberal side of America that had a kind of a dovish prejudice, that we were that fighting is bad. Not that you want to avoid it when possible, but do it and win like FDR did when necessary. But no, we don't want to fight. I think that maybe the Vietnam dovishness got thrown into a kind of overgeneralization that made us kind of weak-kneed, so that you could get a really good man swift-boated, or you would elect a great orator like Obama, who would then forfeit the battle and end up, 2 terms, but by the end of his midway through his second term, getting skunked again in the midterms, not even making the campaign against the indefensible behavior of his opponents. All he can do is things that a president can do without Congress. He was completely crippled in terms of being able to pass legislation because he forfeited the battle. And now we got Joe Biden, who's our inescapable champion to defend American democracy. But he needs all the help he can get from the kinds of people that you're talking about, who can fight, who will fight, and who are capable of moving people.
Amen. We should wrap
Can
up.
I have an amen?
Could I get an amen?
I think that Jamie Raskin might be one of those people.
I think of Jamie Raskin and
Elizabeth Warren might be one of those people.
Yeah. And Bernie's running again, and he's committed to, doing his part to gather the Bernie lovers into the fold of supporting Biden.
You think that Bernie can move the national electorate with his eloquence?
I just know that there are, like I say, 43% of the Democrats in 2016 were with him.
So you think he can get them
I think
on board?
I don't think anyone who loved Bernie has lost any love for Bernie. because he's been as solid as a rock. He's evolved in great ways, not in any bad way. So
He
I don't think he's lost a single supporter. Whether
he
he's
going to go
gained any,
all
I
out
don't know.
for this election? Is he? Are we going to
Yeah,
see him
he
doing
has
everything
already
again?
he's done rallies and such for, this problem of, this election is the most important election. And if we don't, reelect Biden and Harris, we are, destined to have, chaos and, who knows what.
I'm hoping to be able to persuade Republicans who understand what a threat Trump is, to vote for Biden. Not to vote for Trump, which is half of what the country
Yeah.
needs from them, but twice as good as that is not vote for Trump and do vote for Biden. And one of the things that I say when I put out messages like that in my op-eds, there are more on deck. I don't think I've gone public with it yet, but everything about Biden is irrelevant, except that he's the only one who might preserve American democracy who has a chance to win this presidential election. Whatever you think of him, and I know a lot of Republicans have bought a lot of things about Biden, some of which don't seem to me to be fair or true.
Right.
But, I have some Republican friends who I can tell from things that they say that even though they're not for Trump, they somehow have their thinking marinated in, I don't know what, if they're listening to Fox News or
They can't vote for a Democrat. They've been taught since they were young that the Democrats are the guys who take their money and give it to people who are undeserving. And that particular message is very strong in all GOP circles. And they, I remember making a call on your behalf in 2012. A lady answered the phone. I says, "Hey, got a guy running our district, Annie Schmucker, blah, blah, blah." I got not so far. She just said, "Wait, is he a Republican or a Democrat?" I said, "Well, he's a Democrat." And she says, "Honey, I wouldn't vote for a Democrat if they ran Jesus Christ himself." So good luck, young man.
and I made no such claims.
That's right.
Well, um,
But I need to double back to wrapping up. I need to move on.
well, I really appreciate your spending all this time with me
Yeah, it was
talking
very
about
lively.
these things.
I think, I hope we covered, why evolution is the lens to be looking at why evil is important as a concept, and that it's there and it's alive and well, and it's actually gaining momentum. Hopefully we covered that real well today.
Just sort of sum up with respect to our title, the evolutionary perspective shows us that if you take the fateful step into creating civilization, which is unprecedented, you end up unleashing a force that it's not unreasonable to call a force of evil. It's at least destructive, and you can show that. And then the
And that
evolutionary,
it's still not regulated.
yeah, we're
Today,
still working on it, and
we're
we
still trying to figure out how to regulate it.
we gotta bring it under control before we destroy ourselves again.
Right.
Which is a real possibility. And the evolutionary perspective on the other side shows that evolution instills in us the basis for which we can realize that value is built into us, that the good is real, important, and life-serving, that we have access to built into us to guidance of certain vague sorts toward the good and the sacred. All of that becomes visible in a purely secular way of looking at things, using logic to look at what evolution tells us.
I agree wholeheartedly. Thank you, for this conversation.
Well, thank you, Forrest. I'm very grateful to you, and I enjoyed it. And I hope that I gave you all the space that you needed to feel fulfilled in your part of what we've just done together.
You did, for sure.
All right. Hasta la vista, my friend.
All righty. Be well.
Bye. Well, this is the menu for today. I don't know how far I want to go through it. We haven't quite gone 2 hours yet, but I've got a little more stamina. I'm wrestling with what to call this series. And I started out calling it A Man on a Mission. And my firstborn son, who's smarter than I am about matters of marketing, I'm turning now to the second item there, what to call this series to change how we understand the challenges we face. He told me that he thought that was a mistake to call it A Man on a Mission because it focuses attention on me. And what I want to do with the title is to attract people to who are concerned about what's here for me. And that makes some sense. I'm willing to accept that wasn't my thought had been that people would be curious. Well, what's this guy on a mission to do? And maybe that was valid, or maybe it wasn't. But in any event, there are a couple possibilities. Well, three actually. I've called my website, which I encourage people to go to because I lay out this integrative vision of the situation that we're in, both as Americans, but much more the big picture of being the civilization creating creature and what that brings out inevitably as a challenge to us. I call my website a betterhumanstory.org. And so a better human story was another thing that I might have as my general title of this live stream. I don't know if that works. It didn't get, I vetted with a few people and didn't take off. My son thinks that something along the lines of saying that we can be the heroes we need would be a good choice. And I have mixed feelings about that. I think he's probably right that it reaches out to people who are hungry for being able to do something about something heroic that's got to do with saving endangered things that they care about, like American democracy and human civilization on this planet. With respect to American democracy, I can see that that what we do need now is some heroes, and we all have the capacity to act as heroes in the same sense that 16 million Americans were part of the military in World War II, and in a sense, they were all part of the effort to defeat fascism in that time. And I guess that they were, in that respect, part of the force that won the war. And therefore, they're all part of that heroic endeavor, and therefore, they're all heroes. And we are now embattled against fascism in America. And everybody who understands that American democracy is in jeopardy, and that there is only one outcome to the upcoming election that's going to reliably preserve it, so that we know that in 2029 we're going to have another inauguration day if somebody has been elected in a legitimate election. Everybody who knows that can do something and be part of the new heroic force to defeat fascism. But in some sense, my better human story is about a bigger picture about will human civilization get its act together in the next not so many generations, be able to survive for the long haul, or are we going to destroy ourselves? And I think I make a case in some of my videos and in some of my writings. I think I can demonstrate that any species that creates civilization is going to eventually have to confront that problem, that challenge. That is a challenge that we should look at, and we're more likely to meet it if we understand the nature of the forces that are at work. And understanding the forces is basically the heart of my better human story, is discovering forces at work through the evolutionary perspective. But when it comes to, are we going to create a world in which we will be confident that we will not destroy ourselves through a nuclear holocaust? Well, that's unclear, but the heroes we need, is it going to look like a heroism to move the world from the way it is now, where somebody like Vladimir Putin commanding a massive nuclear arsenal can threaten the whole world's peace? That's going to take a lot. It's going to be very difficult. We got to create a different kind of structure that governs the whole overarching system of civilization, besides the sovereign nations, including nuclear superpowers, confronting each other where there's nothing to prevent them from doing like what Putin did. And when it comes to, are we going to be able to adjust our civilization so that we're able to survive for the long haul because we're not destroying the biosphere on which we defend for our long-term survival? Well, it's going to take a lot of work. I mean, we got to make sure that we never again have something like the way this fossil fuel industry has been, that has been powerful enough and has had the amoral character enough that it has paralyzed humankind. And this American economic giant from being able to act responsibly to protect the planet and our children and grandchildren. But is that going to require heroism? So I kind of hesitate to take on that heroes we need. I mean, what if my son's right, for example? That is the ticket to attracting the biggest possible attention from a following. If that title brings in the numbers. There's also the question of whether it will bring in the right people, because the mission that I'm on is basically to be able to convey something that I've put together in the course of the last 54 years that I think could be valuable in terms of equipping us to understand better what we're up against and how we can bring the destructive forces under control. I'm sure that it illuminates things puts things in importantly different light. I actually just feel confident about whether or not getting it out there would have that kind of beneficial impact. I believe that, but I can't be so certain how things would play out. But that's what my mission is. It's been getting it out there enough. So I want to reach a certain kind of person who will take on what it turns out to be an intellectual task of grasping the better human story and the analysis of the various forces that become visible in an evolutionary perspective that really should provide some important amendment to the secular worldview that right now animates, I think, much of the better part of the dynamic in America and in civilization, but does not have all of what it needs in terms of understanding the battle and how it needs to be fought that it needs to prevail over the destructive forces. So I want to attract people, not just for the numbers, though the more people, like what I do, the better I feel. That kind of ego feeding, is good. But in terms of actually accomplishing my mission, I want to attract in the kinds of people whose desire to understand and whose is such, and their capacity to check something out that has to do with an integrated understanding of the forces at work in the human world. I want to attract people who can bring all that into their minds to the extent that in their totality, there is something out there that can actually have an impact. I've gotten my ideas out into the world some, but not enough to have the impact I imagined that they were going to have when that idea changed my life. It's certainly not going to have that impact unless it gets out there more widely. And I'm just had last month I had my 78th birthday, so I feel like the clock is ticking. If it isn't out there enough now, and I'm 78, the mission gets a certain kind of urgency because not everything is going to be, as things now stand, not everything that I think is important for understanding the human situation is out there enough so that if I kick the bucket, it's going to survive and really even have a chance to become a meaningful part of understanding collectively in the civilized world and having the impact that I think it might have that would make it more likely that human civilization will get its act together and survive for the long haul and not destroy itself. Because really, if we destroy ourselves, everything is sacred to me. We go down to tube and life apparently on this planet, which I have a certain reverence for what life has accomplished on this planet. And it took a gamble, and I mean, not that it knew it was taking risks because it's not planned. There's no foresight. It's just what happens. But at some sense of the word, it was a gamble to create a creature with the creative intelligence to develop civilization with all the dangers that inevitably go with that. And it remains to be seen whether life is going to essentially have put forth something that would end up destroying the whole ball game that life spent 3.5 billion years developing on this planet before we took that fateful step. So that's my motive is to attract that kind of a listener of who's either going to read or sort of study what I'm going all out to present as persuasively and as competently as I can, that I think holds water and I think can have a beneficial impact. So I have another proposal that's on the table for consideration, which addresses more of that, I think, and that is the possible title, Seeing Things Whole, WHOLE. That really is at the heart of most everything that about how I have tried to develop understanding, starting before I had this integrative vision, but it's been my mission. I was interdisciplinary in college, history, culture, literature, symbols, psychology, political science. And then when I got my doctorate with a committee specially created to to let me develop those ideas, I was examined on 12 different fields. I think that seeing all the connections of things, seeing a coherent picture is really a big deal for all kinds of reasons. Intellectual, political, spiritual, moral, all kinds of reasons it's important to see things whole. And I'm imagining that if I put out seeing things whole as a criterion, a banner under which the whole process goes, seeing things whole, meaning like putting together the crisis in America, the battle between democracy and fascism, the breakout from the order of that is created by natural selection into a disorder that inevitably engenders a war of all against all. That means that the spirit of the gangster will inevitably have a disproportionate say in how the civilization develops. Putting things together so that you can see that when something, when this happens and that happens and that happens from the same political force, that you put those together and you see that all of them are making the human world worse. And you can infer from that by seeing the connections, something coherent is arising here that needs to be stopped. Well, I don't know if seeing things whole has that effect on other people. I'm hesitant to adopt a slogan that's not got the ringing endorsement of my firstborn son, but I'm wrestling with it still, and would welcome any kind of comments anybody has about, let's say, if the choice were between let's be the heroes that we need, or something a lot like that, and seeing things whole. I'd be interested in your input. And meanwhile, I'll keep struggling with it. Now, I'm going to call this. No, I'm going to take a break for a couple minutes, but I will be right back. And let's see what we're going to talk about here. I'm going to talk about why aren't there more Republicans with Liz Cheney's willingness to put the nation first. I'll be back in a minute. Thank you. I'm going to get into that topic by reading something that it's actually not yet a finished product. It's going to be an op-ed that's going to run in that very red congressional district that Forrest and I were talking about. But it's at this point, it's just a draft, but well enough developed to that I'm happy to share it. And I also want to say how grateful I am to Forrest for helping me out today, putting me through my paces. And this is, the old dog learning a new trick. Branching out into having more conversations with different people, different times on topics that pertain to what I'm putting out, but are of their choosing, that they've got some energy to explore with me. Um, and I'm not yet sure when the next one will be, but I'll be doing this fairly often if it works out. So here's this piece, to which I've given the title, "The Vital Role for Republican Leaders Who See the Threat Trump Poses." Those Republican leaders who understand what's what have a vital role to play in this election. Vital because what they do or fail to do may well determine whether American democracy survives a serious fascist threat. What makes those Republican leaders important is something that seems to be true about the side that supports Trump. For many of those people, their allegiance to Trump is very much a group thing, meaning an important part of it is they're experiencing themselves as part of a community of people who are on the same side of a meaningful battle. It's not just about the leader, but also being in solidarity with one's fellow political foot soldiers. Now, I use the word seem because this is the idea that it's a group thing is something that I think I see. I'm reasonably confident that that's valid, but I don't claim to know for sure just how important this business about being connected with a community of like people. I think I know that culture, but I may be exaggerating this group aspect. What that means is that changing one's mind on politics, which is what we need all good Americans who are planning to vote for fascism to do, is particularly fraught because it means severing the connection with that band of brothers. Especially in some conservative-leaning parts of American culture, separating oneself from others of one's kind is a big deal, but especially in the political battle that Trump represents. In other words, there are parts of conservative culture in America where diversity is definitely not celebrated in all various kinds of the sense of the word. I remember a neighbor stopping, she was driving and I was walking with friends along a dirt road, and she knew I was running, and she said, "Well, you are a Christian, aren't you?" And I don't remember exactly how the conversation went from that, but the clear implication was that being part of that group was essential to being okay. Not every part of American culture deals with that kind of diversity issue that way. Yet the fate of American democracy, yet I say because of in spite of it being quite fraught to separate yourself from your fellows in some parts of conservative America, the fate of American democracy may well depend on getting a lot of Republicans who are now inclined to vote for Trump to change their allegiance. Such stakes make it important to make those Republicans feel more comfortable about making that change. And perhaps the main way to accomplish that is to offer them another Republican community to become part of by rejecting Trump. Republican leaders can give them that permission and lead in the creation of such a community that puts nation above a party that's gone over to fascism. We know that many Republican leaders do recognize the dangers that a Trump victory represents to our nation. For years, it has been reported that members of Congress say such things privately in contradiction to their public behavior. I'm imagining that anybody listening to this will have heard some of those reports over the years. Privately, they speak very differently than publicly. And secondly, some Republican leaders have even made public statements that have been very strong about that. Ideally, anyone who knows that the nation's basic values are threatened will act to defend them, even if that entails some sacrifice. Yeah, be the heroes we need, you know. Ideally, the conduct of Liz Cheney, who gave up her own position and power to do her patriotic duty and honor her oath of office, would be typical. But recent events have underscored how terribly rare such patriotism and integrity are in today's Republican Party. The most recent important leader to betray the nation in that way is Nikki Haley, who had declared in recent times that Trump is unhinged and not qualified to do the president's job. She warned that Trump might not abide by the Constitution and that he could be suicide for our country. Knowing all that, Haley could have used her credibility with many Republicans to protect the nation, but instead, presumably to protect her own future political prospects. I'm not the only one to think that that's what's going on here. She announced she'll support Trump for president. I think in terms of protecting, it's got to do with trying to build a sufficient bridge back to the Republican base that's committed to Trump, sufficient that in some future years she might be forgiven for having gone against Trump. I'm not sure that'll work. It's certainly not what I would have done in her position. She had a chance to play a heroic role, but she's not going to be one of the heroes we need. And she's just the latest among major Republican figures who previously spoke dark truths about Trump and then came out for Trump. The top Republican in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, for example. McConnell once told the country that Trump was guilty of, quote, a disgraceful dereliction of duty, and that Trump could be criminally prosecuted because he was practically and morally responsible for provoking the insurrection of January 6th. But recently, McConnell, declaring that because he's a Republican, he'll support the Republican nominee, which means he'll support Trump, has openly put party ahead of nation. Also getting in line with Trump, declining to be one of the heroes we need, is Trump's former Attorney General, Bill Barr. And here I had a line before, which I took out about what a travesty of an Attorney General he was when he was Trump's corrupt Attorney General. Since refusing to support Trump's to use the big lie to steal the 2020 election and resigning from his office at the very end, which Barr testified under oath, he knew that big lie to be bull, whatever. Barr has publicly accused Trump of a betrayal of his office, of a discarding of country and principle, of caring only for himself. But Barr has recently announced his support for Trump, regaining the very office that Barr knows he betrayed, choosing to stay on the partisan bandwagon rather than appeal to his fellow Republicans to join him in defending country and principle. Why? Why have so few Republican leaders been willing to make so few been willing to make sacrifices for their country, as Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger did after Trump's insurrection? One Republican strategist I saw on TV lately declared that this is just how 99% of politicians are, putting their ambition ahead of principle. But I don't believe that. This isn't just some random policy issue in which politicians might go along with the party line for self-serving reasons, like when George H.W. Bush became a proponent of what he called previously voodoo economics so that he could become Ronald Reagan's running mate. Whether to support or oppose Trump is about protecting the heart of the nation itself. I would bet that it would not have been this way in the Republican Party of Eisenhower's or Reagan's eras if they had faced this issue. And I would bet that if the Democratic Party of today were somehow in that position, there would be plenty of Democrats ready to throw self-serving caution to the winds and tell their supporters to reject such a dangerous leader. Again, that's me betting. That's me making an assertion. I would bake the bet, but I don't really know, because I don't think any political party has been in the position that the Republican Party is in the age of Trump. So the question was, why are people like Liz Cheney with their integrity and patriotism so rare? My explanation goes in this direction. The Republican Party has been steadily changing over the past generation from a normal American party to one where truth and integrity have been punished. As a result, an exceptionally large portion of Republican leaders have already chosen to sacrifice principle for self-serving reasons over the years. A combination of the party attracting people like Matt Gaetz or Marjorie Taylor Greene or whatever, and having already Republican people just willingly go over to that party. The guy I ran against for Congress was Bob Goodlatte here in Virginia's 6th District. After he beat me, he was made chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, and he was in that position when Trump's lawlessness as president was already becoming available or visible in many respects. And he had been a normal Republican when he first got into politics in 1992, and he didn't miss a beat in becoming a loyal Republican foot soldier and serving a president that should have been impeached at the outset, which would have been his job to begin the process. But instead he protected the lawless president rather than investigated him. On the question of integrity, the Republican Party has become no longer a representative group of politicians. That 99%, I don't think, it might apply to today's Republican Party, but I don't think it would apply to normal American parties over the generations. I think integrity never got sold so wholesale a basis as in the Republican Party, as it emerged with Rush Limbaugh, Newt Gingrich, Fox News, Karl Rove, all that, and eventually up to Donald Trump. In for a penny, in for a pound. And it remains to be seen if there will be enough leaders to rise up and speak out, to play the role with the Republican electorate that the nation needs for Republican leaders to play. And I don't know what would be enough. There are generals and admirals. There are people who are cabinet members who work very closely with Trump. There are all kinds of people who could have some standing to go and speak to people who really would not want to give up American democracy, to give them more permission to go into the voting booth and reject the fascist threat and vote for the only guy who might become president who isn't a threat to the survival of American democracy. One place we might find a core of people who to play that role out on the national stage, getting the public's attention and opening a path for Republicans to join a new community that's not the Trump cult, but as though the community of Republicans who put nation ahead of party. Here's the one hope that I identify here. An unusually large number of Republicans in Congress, meaning the House and the Senate, are stepping down rather than run for re-election. We might keep an eye on them to see whether, newly freed of concerns about re-election, many of these use their new freedom to tell the truth to their followers about the threat that they know Donald Trump poses to the system of our government always claimed to revere. You know, I talk about self-serving reasons, but that fits Nikki Haley. But when I think of Bill Barr, why would he do this? I mean, he's not going to be appointed to another attorney generalship. He's in his 70s now. I didn't understand why he was willing to serve this guy when he was already at an age where you would think about your legacy. So I don't understand Bill Barr. And there's a similar question in my mind about Mitch McConnell. I mean, Nikki Haley's in her 50s, and some sense that she would betray the country out of her own ambition. But Mitch McConnell, he doesn't have a political future. He's at the end of the line, quite clearly. He's giving up his long tenure of being the Republican leader in the Senate. He's got a physical condition which doesn't suggest he's going to be on all that much longer. I doubt he'll ever run for office again. So what is the motive for supporting Trump? Is that a loyalty to the plutocracy that he's served so well? And they want Trump because they don't want Biden? I've talked about that. I mean, the Supreme Court has become an accessory to Trump's crimes in the way they gave him this delay. But I don't think it's because they're pro-Trump. I think that the force that put them on the bench actually thinks their interests will be better served by another Trump term, and Trump isn't going to last forever either, than by giving Biden the presidency, which is going to be opposed to the way this plutocracy has been stealing power and wealth from average Americans to beef up itself. So maybe that's what McConnell's doing, is just, what do you guys want? You, the people I've always served, the people that I did everything I could to keep public financing of elections from becoming the law of the land so that you could continue to buy political power. That might be it. But I'm conjecturing. So that's the situation. I'm hoping that there will be enough Republicans, like the people who voted for Nikki Haley, who I think most of them were expressing not Trump as their feeling. I would like for them to get help in making sure that they don't capitulate at the end and follow her to vote for Trump, which might be the end of American democracy. And I would like for there to be a group out there that in the last couple of months of the campaign says to the people who have been listening to the don't vote for Trump, to the additional message, the nation needs you to vote for Biden. Now, earlier in this live stream, there was some talk about in my conversation with Forrest about can't vote for a Democrat. And one of the things that occurred to me to say is that in World War II, the need to defeat the fascist forces of the Nazis, not the Italians, I mean, mostly the German power, and meant that Churchill and FDR met with Uncle Joe Stalin, the commie human monster. I mean, how monstrous he wasn't necessarily as fully recognized then but we made common cause with Stalinist Russia in order to defeat the Nazi power that had taken over all of Europe practically. And if we can vote, any Republican should be told who says, oh, I can't vote for a Democrat. Geez, man, if in World War II we could make common cause with the totalitarian, cruel, human monster dictator of Soviet communist Russia, and surely in this particular battle against fascism, it shouldn't be too difficult to vote for a guy like Joe Biden, who Lindsey Graham described in 2015 as good a human being as God created, the opposite of a human monster. But people have gotten themselves into a weird frame of mind by the force of brokenness that's fed their thinking in terms of us versus them, has really become a way of disabling the good people in America from joining forces to achieve their common goals. And right now, the common goal that we most need to achieve is to defeat the fascist force that, if you go to abetterhumanstory.org, you can see the systemic breakdown that has allowed a force of fascism to threaten the survival of American democracy more than I ever would have believed possible growing up in the America of the 1950s, 60s, and all the way up, even into through the 90s. I didn't think it could get this bad. But because liberal America was incapable of perceiving and adequately fighting this force as it gained in power, we're now in a position where we've got a showdown. And we must make common cause as Americans who believe in the American experiment, who believe in the dimension of America that was honored by the French when they sent us the Statue of Liberty, that believe in the America that was called, with some truth, the leader of the free world. When we believe in what Lincoln said what people at his soldiers at Gettysburg died for, that the government of the people, for the people, and by the people shall not perish from the earth. That common cause we need to come together to make sure of. Well, thank you. I will be back on Monday with another live stream, which I will give thought to what to make the best use of. Those of you who have been listening, I appreciate the support. Please become a follower if you're so moved and you haven't done it already. If you'd like to see whether I deliver the goods that I claim, I do it in writing. That's the craft in which I was trained, and you can find it on abetterhumanstory.org. And I look forward to